I'm Amy Sweeney. I'm the Director of Business Development for GeoPoll. And I've been with the company for about 8 months. And prior to joining GeoPoll, I was with Chemonics International for about 6 years. So that's really where I learned a lot about international development and proposal writing. And primarily was working in the Caucasus and Central Asia region, as well as Afghanistan and Eastern Europe. But I'm now more focused on Africa and Asia. So that's kind of who I am right now. I'm mostly working with partners and doing outreach and helping our partners and clients incorporate mobile and mobile data collection in their various projects and initiatives.
Okay. And I'm Kathy Vonderhaar. I'm actually new to GeoPoll. I came over from the signature line of the MGIV side of the business. Just second day on the job with GeoPoll, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So just to get started, GeoPoll is a mobile platform, and what we do is we send and receive surveys, short surveys over the mobile phone. And really this is a way to collect information from broad-scale populations faster and more effectively. We'll explain a little bit more later on in the presentation, but we've been working with some of our partners and helping them reduce their surveying cost numerators or face-to-face interviews, in some cases up to 50%. So it's a really, a great way to get information from rural communities or in conflict areas or disadvantaged groups, which is, a method that can be across all of those different groups. Just to take a step back, GeoPoll is actually part of a broader organization, a company called Mobile Accord. We're a registered U.S. small business that is based out of Denver, Colorado. And the company was founded in 2005 by an innovator named James Eberhard, who brought the text-to-donation industry to the United States from the UK, actually. So you've probably seen messages that say, donate $10 to the American Red Cross by texting 9099 to donate that $10 to the Haiti Relief Fund. Our entrepreneur and founder brought that industry to the United States in 2005, and currently we hold 85% of the market and are working with NGOs across the states that work internationally and domestically on helping them in their fundraising efforts. So we've partnered with all of the key telecoms here in the United States, like AT&T, Verizon, to be able to get that money directly deducted from individuals' phone bill and then have it pass through our platform and give it directly to the organizations for their programs. So through this process, we were, collecting people's money to fundraise for organizations, and an opportunity came up in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2010, 2011, and the World Bank at the time, they were doing their annual World Development Report on conflict and violence in the DRC. And they were having a really hard time getting information from the public because of all of the atrocities and murders and rapes. People were very closed and didn't want to share any information. And so our innovators and entrepreneurs said, all right, well, if we can get people's money through this platform, we don't want their money, we want their ideas, we want their thoughts, we want information. So we took the platform and deployed it in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2010 with the World Bank, was our partner. And we did a massive poll, and it reached 140,000 people. And this was really the aha moment for us of, wow, this tool could really work. Because the World Bank was having a hard time having people share information, but yet we were getting text message responses from people, reporting incidences of rape or domestic violence. So since 2010, GeoPoll has been deployed in up to 20 different countries, and it is what essentially GeoPoll is today, which we'll talk about now. So you might wonder if you're doing a lot of research, use a lot of different methods and modes, and you hear a lot about mobile, particularly in international space these days, and you might wonder, well, is this really a viable method to get information that's reliable? And from our perspective, we see 4 main ways of how and why mobile is important. And the first point is that overall there's greater penetration in the developing world of mobile phones. Currently in Africa, the cell phone penetration is approximately 85%, and that's growing every day. in the world, there's 7 billion people and there's 6 billion cell phones. So it's becoming the largest common denominator to reach people. And particularly in the developing world, they're skipping the landline technology or some of the technologies we had 10 years ago and going straight to cell phones and some of the more smart technologies. So there's greater penetration. Second is there's more access. While there's 85% penetration of cell phones, there's only 10% penetration of internet for the most part in the developing world. And so there's more access to cell phones. Everyone typically has a small little Nokia phone that costs $25 that they make phone calls and have a little scratch off for minutes. And they carry it around with them everywhere. And if you look around this room right now, if you see how many people have their cell phone in front of them, it's over half. And so it's always something that's kind of close to you. There's actually statistics out there that say people check their cell phone every 15 minutes, whereas they might not check their email as often. So there's more access overall. And kind of piggybacking off the example I presented for the World Bank and the DRC, there's a whole level of anonymity with a cell phone. It's not like you're walking up to someone inquiring 20 different questions at one time and looking for a particular response, but rather they're self-reporting over the cell phone and answering questions. So they might be more apt to provide more honest and descriptive answers, whereas face-to-face element could skew that a little bit. And as a result, the information we're getting, we believe, is to be unfiltered because there's not a development worker standing in front of them where people think, oh, if I answer this way, maybe they'll give me something new, or maybe I'll get that, $2,000 I needed for a grant. So it's an interesting dynamic that the cell phone creates in collecting data, and something that we can talk more about based on our experience of doing this over the last few years. The way that we work and our general approach is that we partner with mobile network operators. Hi, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. We're just getting started. So we partner directly with mobile network operators in local markets. So these are the telecommunications companies that you probably see when you travel. It's the Tigos or the Airtels or the Roshan in Afghanistan. Since we come from the telecommunications space and have a lot of people within our company that come from that space, we have relationships and are able to develop partnerships so that we're able to connect with their networks. And this is key, and one of the major distinguishing factors of our company versus other mobile technology companies out there is that we have these partnerships. And what this allows us to do is three primary things. The first is we're able to do location targeting. So we could send a mobile survey across an entire country of Afghanistan, for example, if that's what you needed as part of your research efforts or wanted to get a better lay of the land of what's going on at a community level across an entire country. Alternatively, which is the really interesting thing, is we could do geo-referencing or geo-targeting, what this means is that if you wanted a specific province within a country like Kandahar or Herat, we can send the surveys directly to that particular province. And then we're able to target the location based on the nearest cell phone, so we have an idea of where the response is coming from. And that's based on where they're at over a 1 month period, so it's normalized over a 1 month period. So they might be, living in Kandahar as their home, but might be traveling to Kabul on the day that they respond to us, but it'll show up that they're actually from Kandahar because it's normalized over a 1 month period. Typically, it's down to the first administrative level. Sometimes, based on the infrastructure of the telecommunications within the country, it can go down to the district level. But it really just depends on which country we're talking about. And then the second major thing we're able to do is two-way communications through a couple of different modes. You've probably heard a lot about SMS texting and surveying. That's the primary mode that we use. So individuals receive a text message and then respond to that text message and receive the second text message and answer the second question. Our second mode is voice, and essentially that's the same exact survey, but it's pre-recorded over the telephone, and so individuals will receive a phone call instead, pick up the phone, and then respond to the survey questions. And then the third major thing we're able to do is tie into the telecommunications carrier's billing system. And this is really key because what that allows us to do is never charge the respondents for answering. And this is really key to make sure there's no economic barriers for participation, because as you probably know, a lot of people use those little scratch-offs. And if they don't have minutes on their phone, they might not be able to respond. But we always make it very clear that it's always free to respond, and that no time will be deducted from their account for responding. And then in addition to that, once they've completed the survey, we can provide an incentive as a top-up, which essentially means small times airtime credit directly deposited into their phone so they can make future calls to whoever they would like. And typically those are approximately 50 US cents in local currency. So in Afghanistan it's 25 Afghani. And incentives are optional. Some programs want them, some programs don't. And we've found that we've been doing some experiments around incentives and whether or not they provide better response rates versus not. And overall they do. Yeah. So this map here just shows you currently where we're connected. For the countries where we're directly connected with the telecommunication companies, we call them GeoPoll Plus markets. So those are in green. Right now it's primarily sub-Saharan Africa. You can see the green ones there, plus Tunisia, Yemen, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Kyrgyzstan. And then in 2014 and 2015, we're targeting those countries that are in orange, which is the rest of sub-Saharan Africa for the most part. There's some missing there. We're going to be expanding into Asia and then into Latin America. So that's kind of what our roadmap looks like. But with that being said, we can pull anywhere around the world with the exception of North Korea, and that's another key factor. We would just be using voice mode. So if you wanted to do a survey in South Sudan, for example, we certainly can do that. It just may not be as targeted because we don't have the direct connectivity. Okay. So we have a couple of different services and how we work. The first one is called GeoPoll On Demand. Essentially, this is customized research. This is customized surveys based on whatever project you're working on, whatever research topic you might be looking into, whatever journalists or media outlet organizations, whatever information they might need to know from the population. So this is what we would do with our partners is we work to create the survey. And this is the first step. It really starts with what do you want to know? What do you need to know? And our surveys typically are 10 to 12 questions, and we try to limit that. The technology can actually handle up to many more, but we found based on our testing and experience that drop-off rates start to happen around 16 questions. And to really keep users engaged and to provide a good user experience, we like to keep them short.
And that's one after another.
Yeah, the way that it works for SMS, for example, is the first message they receive is an opt-in message that says, this is a GeoPoll survey on your media habits or your access to different media means. Would you like to take the survey? Press 1. If you need help or want more information, press 2. If they push 1, they opt into the survey, and then they would receive the very first question. If they answer that question, then the second comes. So it's like rolling. They can always opt out, so users never have to feel like they're obligated to take a survey. They just push 2 for help, and then they can opt out through that route. For voice, it's very similar, except they receive a phone call, and they opt in. And typically, voice is really good for low literacy rates in countries of low literacy. Like in Afghanistan, we primarily only do voice. We've tried SMS. It just doesn't work. And so we found even though within illiterate populations, they can still find 1, 2, or 3 on the keypad. Typically, we don't like to mix modes, so we would use just one mode. But they do have an option for SMS or voice option of which language they would like to take it in. So in Kenya, we send the opt-in message in both English and Kiswahili. and they can push 1 to take it in English or 2 to take the survey in Kiswahili. So that's a way to make sure we're kind of being inclusive and not, excluding particular populations just because of the language barrier.
Another question.
Yeah, sure.
There's only like 10 or 12 questions, and I completely understand that. Having done the listening post on Twitter, we do it in New Orleans with a project, just very small versions of it. I know there's only 1 or 2 questions, and even that sometimes feels a bit like a lot. So I can see how 10 could be a lot. How do you collect the kind of demographic information that you can then contextualize the finding?
So, and the numbers. How are you, but how are you?
So we're building a database of users. Currently we have 130 million users in our database. And essentially what we're doing is we're using a variety of methods to get individuals into our database. That includes random digit dialing, and then having people opt into our database. And what they're doing is we ask them demographic questions at that time. What is your age? What is your gender? And we're starting to ask employment questions like, are you employed or unemployed, and what your education level is. Now, the system is getting smarter as we're going through this and as we're building more users and sending out more surveys. So, for example, in Afghanistan or in Ghana, a lot of our users are indexed. So what we can do is target those specific demographics. So if you wanted women between the ages of 18 to 25 within the North Province of Ghana, boom, we can hit that population. But if we don't have that demographic information already built up into the system, we can ask it as part of the survey. So that's kind of how we're approaching it. Regarding the short surveys, while we do try to limit it to 10 to 12 questions per survey, we have done and worked with partners like Gallup who had questions that were like 50. And so what we did is we broke those out into 3 consecutive days and then asked the same users. We can retarget users. We sent a different survey to the same users over a course of 3 days to complete the full 50-question survey.
And do you give them like an incentive after every day so they think, well, next day I'll do it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. So really, it has to start with creating the questions, and we work with our partners to help SMSize or mobile phoneize those questions. We've learned a lot about asking a question a certain way might get a certain response in some countries, but we really look to our partners to help drive the content of those surveys. We really look to you guys who are working with teams on the ground to know what your overall objective is, but we help to kind of streamline them and make sure that they're going to get a response.
Can I just ask another question about the question? So the responses that you're getting from people, like for example on voice, are they generally like 1-digit responses, like yes, no, or give a number, or are they actually textual responses, like more qualitative responses, like where's the balance on that?
So that's a really good question. We can offer like multiple choice, rating, Likert scale, or open-ended. Now, open-ended is easier to do on SMS because it doesn't require like as much airtime. Whereas if you on a voice survey you do open-ended, it just drives up the cost because people could talk for 2 minutes about, tell us about your family, and they can be like blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then if it's in a different language, we have to go back, translate all of that, recode it into the survey. So we don't like to do open-ended on voice, but the technology can support a lot of different types of actual questions and has pretty sophisticated branching and skip logic. And our approach that we've done to help with some of the more qualitative research is we do a lot of open-ended questions, like very specific targeted surveys, asking open-ended questions through text to get lists, or like, for example, which media outlets do you listen to, which radio stations do you listen to in Tanzania? Well, we don't know all the radio stations in Tanzania, so we're asking our users what those are and then using those responses to develop, answers to our questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, step 1 is to create the survey questions. And then as I mentioned, it can be in English or the local language. The second step of doing the sort of customized research survey is to select the audience. This is what I was mentioning about. You can select it from the GeoPoll database. You could say I would like a a survey of 1,000 people across an entire country, or I would like it more targeted to women males between 25 and 35. So this is where we would essentially develop a survey methodology with you, and we have methodologists and research coordinators on staff who can work through those things with our clients. And then third, we take the survey questions and upload it into our platform. So we do that directly, and then we launch the survey out. We can set time frames in the actual platform of what time we want the survey to be sent in local time. We've done testing in certain countries, like in Ghana. If you send it between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m., you're going to get the highest response rates. If you send it at 10 a.m., not so much. But yet in Afghanistan, you have to send it at 9 in the morning because we get better response times then. And then within 24 to typically 72 hours, we get the results back. And we compile those into an easy to digest format. We can do Excel, or we can do SPSS if that's preferred. And essentially the data is organized by user. So we never share personal information or phone numbers. We always identify them through a user ID, and it includes their demographic information, their age, their gender, and then each of their responses to the questions, as well as the location information. And as I had mentioned, we can actually retarget users. So if you're doing an ongoing study, whether it's 1 month, quarterly, or over a year, we can retarget the group to see what changes might happen over time.
Is there a back end where you and your clients kind of work together through this? So like say if Internews wanted to partner with GeoPoll, would we be able to see like data coming in, or would you guys do everything and package it?
We would manage that. Our operations staff checks the platform every day to make sure the technology is running appropriately, that messages are being sent, there's not weird drop-offs or cut-offs of our users, maybe the survey isn't being administered properly through the technology. And so we would, if you wanted 1,000 surveys or 5,000 surveys, we would continue to manage it until we get those responses and then shut the poll off.
Actually, that was the question I was going to ask, was actually about like QC, quality control. Like, how do you check that the responses are kind of okay? Do you actually do any kind of back checking with people, like calling them back and saying?
We have done that, yeah. And we do have quality control measures in place that we work through in each of our surveys. On the one hand, we're checking the data daily to make sure what's coming in doesn't look too skewed in one direction. We also look for things like if people are just pushing 11111, which doesn't happen a lot, but you can really see it when it's coming through. You kind of sticks out like a red stoplight. Or things like if people are responding within very quickly, we can see how long it takes them to complete the poll.
Right.
So we can see if there might be some sort of something fishy going on there. And we take the data if there's available information that's in a similar area, maybe around food security or food pricing. We look at the data and try to compare it with other information out there to make sure it's looking somewhat in the same range. And what we're able to do with some questions, we found that if we see something coming back on day one, it's like, whoa, this looks a little bit weird. Like in Ghana, we had asked a question of, how many people live in your home? And on day one, a lot of the answers came back 10,000, 9,500, and we were like, So we called our partner in Ghana and said, okay, something's going on here. Like, yeah, we need to say house, because home refers to the whole village. So yeah, these are the types of measures that we're going through. And the beauty of SMS is it's like, okay, you see this day one, you can make a change and send the question back out. Whereas if you're going through enumerators or doing research, you have to go back across the river, through the woods, to the village.
I just have one quick question about, well, two things really. One is, when you select your sample, you said that you can use your network of users, so it's kind of self-selected in a slightly, because they're people who are registered on your database at that point. So although they're randomized, it's within the group of people who are already selected, although you said that's a very large group. But you said you can do it in a more randomized way, where you just do a sort of a general release to the system, and then people, I guess, self-complete depending on.
Yeah, through our database we do random selection. So we do blasts out to a number of users, and if they decide to opt in, then they're part of the sample. We are also able to, as part of our approach, we're shooting to get 50% of the mobile population into our database for each country, or 15% of the overall population, which we believe is feasible and would be appropriate to actually make it representative to address your issue, because I think that's where you're going. At the same time, I mean, we do recognize that not every single mobile user is in the database, but looking at it from a broader population perspective, that is our approach thus far. And so in some countries like Ghana, we're able to do, I think there's 9 million people, 9 million people, and we have 9 million people in our database, and there's like 11 million people in the country. So we're able to do pre-stratification. So in specific regions, we look at, okay, what is the population in that particular region? What's the percentage of women versus men? And then from our database, we pre-stratify so that we're hitting a representative amount of those two populations within that province.
Right.
Outside of the database, if you have a set number of users or program beneficiaries that you want to get information from, or a community specifically that you're working on, if you get the phone numbers for us, we can put that into the platform and we can send the survey directly to those beneficiaries. And so that's something we've also been working with our partners on, because we do recognize, I mean, the advantage of GeoPoll is the broad scale reach. It's able to scale and get broad samples of the population. But if you wanted something more targeted for your specific project, we're able to do that as well.
And what is your cutoff point for or the percentage of response rate that you look for? So how do you decide you have enough people responding?
Well, we typically open the poll, we set parameters around it. All right, we're going to run the poll anywhere from 1 to 3 days. And if we need to get 1,000 responses and we've received those 1,000 responses by day 1, we shut the poll off. But if it takes us 3 days to get that, if people respond after day 3, they're ineligible because we closed the poll. So the response rates actually are based on the specific country. We're finding different things based on the country. Ghana and Nigeria are all about it. We've been starting to do panels in Ghana. Actually, we're doing TV measurement and radio measurement there, and we're sending our panels a survey every single 4 hours, and they're responding of which TV they're watching. And so those response rates for panels are upwards of 90%.
Wow. I was going to ask you about panels.
But in other countries, I would say, like Afghanistan, 1%. So I would say the average rate of response rates, it really is going to depend on the country, and I'm hesitant to give you a number, but it's anywhere between, I would say, 1 to 5%, which isn't bad for surveying.
Yeah. No, it's pretty good. Okay, I've got one last question before you can finally move on.
Okay.
Is you mentioned the difficult to access population, and I'm thinking, in my previous incarnation, and actually still in parallel with my work I do here, I do a lot of work with development. And one of the issues is getting to those communities. If we were to do a survey with people in China, it would have to be a phone call because they're not on the database, and obviously the Chinese are not going to be agreeing to participate. So that's an international phone call, so that becomes very expensive, right?
For voice, it's I would have to get you an exact quote for it. It's based on airtime cost per minute, and so I have a little spreadsheet that I can look at. But essentially, for voice in general, it is a little bit higher cost point. In some cases, we don't have to make the international call. It can be done through different networks, so it's not as expensive, but it really depends on the country and the situation because, as you know, every local telecommunication regulation is different, and we're navigating that. So,
have you done any work in China?
Not yet.
Yeah,
No.
Yeah. But that would be great.
Maybe for 2016. So yeah, these are the modes that I talked about earlier for SMS surveys. As I mentioned, it supports multiple choice, rating scale, or open-ended questions. It can be conducted in local languages. with the exception of some really obscure indigenous languages, but for example, we can do Arabic typeface, Cyrillic, Dari, Pashto, French. We've done French a lot. That means Latin characters, but essentially any local languages. Either our partners translate it, or we have service providers where we do translations as well. It just depends on the preference. And also, users respond at their convenience, which is one of the beauties of SMS. Once they receive the opt-in message, as we talked about earlier, they can come back at a later time and answer that first question. They could be in the middle of dinner with their family and the first text message comes through, but they can, after doing the dishes and sit down, they can answer the question. So it's a little bit more flexible in terms of their responsibility. And then participation is always free. They're never charged. And incentives are optional, but available and recommended. Voice is the second mode that we talked about. Essentially, this is the survey instrument translated into a voice recording, and the individual receives a phone call. This is ideal for low literacy rates or regions or entire countries with low literacy rates. For example, in Mali, we only do voice, or Afghanistan. And they can also be in local languages. Obviously, the more localized and native it can sound, the more legitimate and higher response rates that we receive. And we're working with our partners to be able to do those voice recordings or through service providers. And it supports multiple choice or rating scale. There's no character limit. One thing I forgot to mention with SMS, per question and answer, we have a 160 character limit. And we have a form that we work with our partners on that they type the questions in to help them count how many characters it can be. And then participation is always free and incentives are available. So here's just a couple of examples of partners we've worked with. There's a lot more than this, but as I mentioned, the World Bank and the DRC. But one interesting thing that we're doing at the World Food Program is they have very specific indicators they're tracking as part of their food security monitoring. And we worked with them very closely to help streamline those indicators and make them into questions that were appropriate for the mobile phone. And we started off also in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the North and South Kivu provinces, which are very conflict-ridden. And we ran the data for them on a quarterly basis. And the questions were like, in the last 7 days, how many times did you eat meat? In the last 7 days, how many times did you have cereals? In the last 7 days, how many times did you have to give food to another member of your family in order for them to eat? And so what this information was doing was allowing them to make better, more timely food distribution decisions for those two regions.
Well, brings up a question, just in terms of mobile penetration in some of these countries, like in the Kivu region, where they're looking at if these families aren't eating meat, but they get a cell phone, does that correlate? Just, I guess, their income. And is it?
I guess it depends on what kind of phone they have, but mobile penetration in the DRC is really quite high actually. And what we were able to do for the World Food Program, which they weren't able to do, is we were able to get more displaced persons in IDP camps, which they weren't able to reach. So people in IDP camps doesn't necessarily mean they were richer or poorer, but in theory they're less advantaged because they're in those camps, but they still had cell phones. And so that's one example of being able to kind of reach the poorest of the poor.
Well, also people share cell phones.
They also share SMS. They also share SMS cards, plug them in once a day to check.
So I was just wondering if there's ever a thing saying, would you give your phone, do you share your phone, and if so, would you ask other people to use the survey as well, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge that we face, in knowing that people sometimes have multiple phones or one phone for multiple people within a family or multiple SIM cards. And that's something that, we recognize, but ultimately it's a challenge. But I think one of the things is when you're randomly selecting from our database of users, the chances of, one person being selected that has multiple phones is less likely. If someone has 3 phones, all 3 phones aren't going to be selected for the most part.
They can only answer the survey once.
Yeah.
Right. So, because I just think sometimes, there have been some communities where there's one phone sort of in the community and people will go and borrow it or use it.
Right.
And so, in a way, you could actually get at those communities by getting multiple people to respond using one phone.
Yeah.
So that it's sort of a way of getting the penetration just a bit deeper and just for people who, because presumably the person who owns the phone is going to tend to be the person who responds.
Right.
So not the others around who may be less rich or less, maybe
Yeah.
the man of the house typically.
Yeah, that's interesting, and we would consider doing some testing around it. Like if there's a project, you get asked as one of the questions, is this your phone only, or do you share it amongst your community, and if so, what that looks like. And after you answer the survey, we'll send you another one and give it to someone else, and they can take it.
Right. Exactly. Use it as a sort of snowballing tool.
Yeah.
I think it could be quite useful.
Do you guys ever work right after a humanitarian crisis or in another situation where sort of the baseline has to be established? Like your population just moved somewhere else, or there was just a big disruption and you had to do like a new baseline before you started?
Yeah, we're looking like through the MGive side of the business, which is the Texas Nations. They do a lot of post-disaster and response fundraising and getting in there directly after those happens to get organizations moving with funding. On the GeoPoll side, that's something we're looking very closely at and would love a partner to work on that with. What we have done is it's not so much on the natural disaster or humanitarian crisis side, but more on the political transition or changing regime side. For example, in Tunisia, we right after the transition in I think 2011, we were doing surveys with a local media outlet there on basic perceptions and key issues of the population, particularly among youth. We have really high youth responses in a lot of our countries, and it was how they felt about the new constitution, the new leadership, what they thought the key issues were. And actually what they said is, we don't care about all this politics stuff, we just want a better economy, we want jobs. Which they're both interrelated, but through the poll we were able to, the local partner we were working through, I can't remember the name, you probably would know them maybe if you've done some work there, but they took the information and they developed it into a public information campaign. So they worked with local media outlets to be able to share this information so that their leaders could understand, like, all right, you guys are focused more on this, and really the population is saying they want this, more of this. So we actually did that poll over a 6-month period, and we could see how things changed over that time, and particularly in a transition like that, things are changing constantly, and sentiments are changing, and you kind of see the regional changes. They felt over here in this region one way, but over here it was less of a concern. So it could draw really interesting sort of regional comparisons.
I have a question. I see the partners up here, basically UN agencies, the World Bank, and I see that you work with research firms and businesses.
Yeah.
Do you ever work with like local media outlets, or is it mainly like larger groups, NGOs?
So far it's been primarily larger development implementers and market research companies, but absolutely we're now focusing on not specifically media, but advertising agencies or I guess some media outlets are looking for better information about consumption habits and what people are doing.
Right.
But yeah, that really it brings up an interesting point, which is the one I want to talk about next, is our knowledge product. So while we're doing on-demand, customized research surveys, we're actually developing products. We call this GeoPoll Knowledge, and I think this directly relates to what you were talking about. We're starting to do and are developing TV and radio measurement products, which essentially is doing TV and radio ratings in a particular country. And so that's something that not so much the media outlets are looking towards, but obviously the advertisers or the corporations are looking to, but also maybe some of the projects that you're working on. I spoke with one of your projects in Kyrgyzstan, and they're interested in helping the newly formed public broadcaster understand what the ratings are for these national programs and how the broadcasters are viewed. And so what we're doing is it's done on a weekly basis, so the TV and radio measurement surveys are actually happening over a course of 7 days every month. And so it's assessing which exact TV or radio stations people are watching and what time, between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., 10 a.m. to noon. And this is a product we're developing and that you can be bought on a subscription basis that can be used kind of like as a report that you get on a regular basis. And the same thing we're doing also with food security, which essentially started out with the World Food Program, but it's now being expanded into other organizations as well. But it's tracking key food security indicators and pricing information that can be developed into a quarterly report. It's actually visualized an online dashboard now. We're getting rid of the paper. So those are just a couple of ideas of things that we're developing. From a more
trend aspect, just so trends can be kind of monitored, right?
Yeah, and getting data so that you can use it on a regular basis to inform whatever decisions you need to make, whether it's which TV station you're going to advertise on, understanding what listeners are actually listening to a particular TV station.
How do you collect the numbers, and how much do you need to have informed consent before you actually ask people for information, and how much people are aware of how their information is going to be used?
Yeah, so we did address it a little bit, but I'll just recap. We're building a database of users, and we're building that database through a variety of mechanisms, one of which is random digit dialing. So we're making phone calls. We've developed an algorithm to call into countries and get people to opt in. We're telling them, this is a GeoPoll service, this is what it does. If you'd like to be part of the service, please opt in, and then we ask them for their demographic information. And then for future surveys, we can re-engage them in the future, and they can answer the survey. Once they've opted into the database, if they receive a survey down the line and they don't want to answer it, they can always decide to opt out. So they're never obligated to always answer the survey.
Is the organization identified in the initial survey question?
I'm
asking because I'm only 2 days on the job.
It depends. We've actually found that co-branding sometimes does lead to skewing of results. Like if you say this is a GeoPoll and USAID survey. So we try to always keep it as a GeoPoll survey so that they know this is a reliable, safe, secure, and free service to provide consistency to because the better user experience we're able to provide them, the more likely they're to continue using it. But what we try to do is address the topic of the survey. Like this is a GeoPoll survey on food security and your access to finance. Press 1 to opt in if you want to take it. Some people might not be interested in that or have no knowledge of that and say no. They don't have to. Other cases with our partners, we did with UNDP, they actually were very adamant and said, we want to be co-branded on the opt-in, you need to put our name, and we did. There's always a help option in all of our surveys, and we've had some individuals push that option and send us a text message back saying, who will this information be going to? Or sometimes this is on rare cases, but sometimes people write into our website inquiries and say, I want to take your survey, but, what is it about? Who is this for? In some cases that happens. A lot of times it doesn't. A lot of people are actually writing us to say, can you add us to your database? We want to take your surveys. But that's one option where we can always help our users. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter page that we can network with them so they feel supported and don't feel like we're just trying to get information from them. But we never share personal information, like personal identified information such as their phone number. I mentioned earlier we always assign a user ID number to them. We have it in our database, but when we share it with our partners, we assign them an ID number. But their age and their gender is being shared because they're sharing that with us. They're telling us.
Yeah.
And that's pretty standard information that you give in a survey response. So we do take it very seriously, though, because we know there's a lot of skepticism around it, particularly everything going on with NSA here in the States. And those regulations aren't as robust in the developing world. A lot of them don't have any privacy or privacy laws like that. And so what we try to do the best that we can is operate under how we would operate here in the United States with the best integrity that we can possibly employ. And we try to, we take a look at the survey questions. If we're not comfortable asking them, we don't. If it's around highly political or sensitive topics in an area that's really hot at the moment, we turn down partners that we really can't run that poll. To address the feedback loop and kind of the two-way communication, we do recognize that in some cases, and particularly on development projects and getting the information back to them is key. We haven't done it yet, but we have proposals submitted that include that element. So hopefully in 6 months or a year, I'll be able to say, yes, we've done it. But recognize that feedback loops are important so that people aren't feeling like they're just constantly sharing information. But it's a balance, and it really depends on what the objectives of the project are. For SMS, it's $2.50 per person plus 20 cents per question. So if you had 10 questions at 20 cents a piece plus the $2.50 per person, it's about $5 per person. So if you needed a survey of 500 people, it'd be 500 people times $5, which is what, $2,500? Plus, for each survey that we run, we do a survey administration fee of $2,500.
Right.
That's for helping with the question review, setting up the survey methodology, managing the poll through the process of the platform, cleaning the data, doing data checks, and getting it over to you. So that's a standard fee. If it was for voice, as I mentioned, it is a little higher price point, but based on the market. If there's a particular country you're interested, I could look in and talk to our finance department about it. But essentially, it could go anywhere from like $25 per completed survey up to $50. So it really depends. But when you're looking at it compared to doing face-to-face interviews, it's actually pretty cheap. And for voice, the $2,500 administration fee also applies.